but it's directly connected. That's actually my question. The piece of legislation, I think last session about the CHIPS Act and the UGB, and that were those things related to how these processes work? And if so, does this help address that in the same way it might address the process that the North Plains use in their EOA?
Chair Halova, Commissioner Lazo, it's a very good question. Senate Bill 4, I believe, is the bill that you're referring to, which made that some of the cities that were in the process of completing an economic opportunities analysis were attempting to align their long-range employment lands planning with opportunities presented by the Federal CHIPS Act and Senate Bill 4 during the time. However, I'm not sure that that this is a direct response to that so much as it is looking to avoid any future controversy over the ways that such a urban growth boundary expansion might occur.
Yeah, it seemed indirectly related. So the other thing is, there's a follow-up. The other, I don't want to keep expanding the interest list, but from the equity perspective, the other group that I was trying to think of who would be here, and I think we've seen a rise of environmental justice folks involved in some of the UGB expansion conversations, and particularly if we're talking about industrial uses that would expand the UGB.
Thank you. We do have climate advocacy represented on the RAC, and if that covers your suggestion for environmental advocacy, then
yes, in a way. And I think they're closely related, but they're so I think the environmental justice folks I think are potentially included that, but so yeah, thank you.
Sure, Leela. If I could just say, just for our record, that our understanding, based on what you said, is because I completely agree, we want to make sure that environmental justice is included in that. So as long as we have that on our record, that we're in agreement, then I feel comfortable.
So that makes me say, you know, sometimes we have slash. Do we say like economic justice? So do we say climate advocacy / environmental justice, just so that it's aware that we're looking for people that if they have both? That would be amazing.
Chair Halova, we can definitely make that change.
Deputy Director Green.
I think if thanks, Chair Halova. Thanks, Lee. We have the recruitment in process right now, given the timelines and the pressure to complete before 2024. We would take your suggestions, Commissioner Lazo, you know, for folks to reach out to directly. We can change the advertisement on our website according to your recommendations today, including for agricultural land and working lands protection. But I think we're going to be just needing to do some direct outreach at Farm Bureau, other organizations. So we'd really appreciate any names you might have, but we'll change the public advertisement as well, if that's okay. Yeah, thank you. And when does it conclude, Lee? February 13th?
It's currently scheduled for February 13th. We can extend that if we decide that significant revisions are required to the post-RAC composition.
Do a few more Gov deliveries and help spread the word. So if Commission would like, we can also forward that Gov delivery to you to forward to partners. So thank you. Thanks so much.
Does the commissioners have a motion? Anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move that the commission initiate rulemaking on the target industries approach, approve the draft change included as attachment A, and direct the department to appoint the RAC with some of the additions that were mentioned today in the manner described in the staff report.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that, Commissioner Thompson.
Jan, if you could take the roll call.
Commissioner Warren.
Aye.
Commissioner Boyer.
Aye.
Commissioner Lazo.
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Lilac. Chair Halova.
Aye. And with that, the motion passes. We are now going to break for lunch and return in an hour, a little bit under an hour, which is 12:45 p.m. with agenda item number 6, Sage Grouse Annual Report with John Jennings, Community Services Specialist. Happy lunch. Welcome back from lunch to the January 25th LCDC meeting. We'll now have agenda item number 6, Sage Grouse Annual Report from John Jennings, Community Service Specialist, and Gordon Hauer, Community Service Division Manager. I understand that John will be leading the presentation. I didn't know, Gordon, if you had any words to say beforehand. Thank you.
So am I hot?
Yes, but I think you have to bring it really close to yours.
Thank you, Chair Alova. Members of the commission, I'm John Jennings. I'm the Community Services Specialist. I want to welcome Councilor Steve Shipsey back after his time off. It's good to have him off IR. I'm going to do my best to provide our annual sage grouse report, as well as offer a high level of Goal 5 overview, statewide planning Goal 5, and as well as kind of integrate how that works in context of the LCDC sage grouse rule. And let's see here. I think I can move it like this. So the greater sage grouse, obviously that's why we're here today. This is a species. I'm going to start my video. Apologize for that. This is an iconic Western species. I mean, they've been around and they've been prevalent in this landscape. All right, that's better. Perfect. So that's saying this is an iconic Western species. They've been around an awful long time. They're chronicled in the diaries of Lewis and Clark. There are sagebrush obligate, which means they're dependent upon that sagebrush habitat for their survival. They're also considered an indicator species, which means that as they're doing well, it's understood that the sagebrush habitat ecosystem and all of the other species dependent upon that habitat are also doing well. And the converse is also true. If they're in decline, then chances are our sagebrush habitat isn't doing that well. They have suffered a significant loss of habitat over the last century or two, and they have been strongly considered as a candidate for listing under the Federal Endangered Species Act. I'd just say this particular picture was taken at a lek in the upper territory of Crook County, Oregon, on the GI Ranch. And when I see this, it makes me remember a quote from John O'Keefe, who's a past president of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association, who liked to say, and was right on, what's good for the bird is good for the herd. And I think you see those cattle in the background. I think that's an example of that. Moving on, sage grouse country. This is a picture of kind of where they are, where they've been. The yellow is an indication of presumed past range. 11 Western states, millions and millions of acres. A lot of it's federal land. In Oregon, that breaks down to about 70% federal, 30% non-federal. Actually, the largest non-federal landowner in Oregon is the Department of State Lands. They've got a little over 500,000 acres out there in that desert. And Southeast Oregon is a sagebrush stronghold. We have a really unique and important amount of intact sagebrush habitat down there, which is why it's so important. It's kind of some background of how do we get into this conversation. Leading up to 2010, there was a series of petitions for listing that were received by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and some court cases. The determination at that time was that listing was warranted, and I want to take a moment and emphasize that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service determined that the listing was warranted. The species was warranted for listing, but they didn't have time to get to it. But they committed to doing it, and they were going to review it again in 2015. And some of the reasons that led them to reach that original conclusion was threats from wildfire, invasive weeds, and habitat fragmentation. Obviously, we can't regulate for wildfire. Hopefully we can figure that out one of these days. Nor invasive weeds, but habitat fragmentation. And in this context, we're talking about energy facilities, transmission facilities, infrastructure, mining, urbanization, which should be understood to mean rural sprawl in this context, and agricultural conversion. So obviously we don't limit, we don't regulate or zone for agricultural conversion, but we can for the other pieces. ODF&W developed their sage-grouse conservation strategy, which focused on these core areas. We'll talk a bit more about that later. And it subsequently rolled into the sage-grouse action plan, which was it really informed by Oregon Sage-Grouse Conservation Partnership, SageCon, which I believe was a really remarkable coalition of interested parties that came together and worked on that. I mean, there was really united and folks that were not necessarily considered natural allies really were pulling in the same direction. We had we're fortunate to have some really productive partnerships with some Native American tribes, particularly the Burns Paiutes, and that led to the Sage-Grouse Action Plan, which really anchored the U.S. Fish and Wildlife decision to not list the species, and we walked them back from the brink. They were ready to list, and we walked them back from that. And you have to remember, at that time there was a lot of anxiety. I know I'm taking a long time. I'll move along, I promise. But I need to make this point. There was a lot of concern and anxiety that this was going to do to our ranching communities what the spotted owl did to our timber communities, which was leave them in shambles. So this was a big deal. So we got talking about, okay, what can we do? And the terminology that the service used with regards to these habitat fragmentation threats was they did not find or were unable to conclude there was an adequate regulatory mechanisms to curb those and manage those activities. When it came to Oregon, we said, check it out. We've got this tool, no one else has. It's Goal 5, right? Our statewide planning Goal 5 positions us to be able to consider that. This is some language straight out of the roots. I think that's inspiring to me to read. Protecting natural resources and conserving scenic history. Obviously, you guys can read it too, but for present and future generations, I mean, that's stirring. I find that stirring. That's why, kind of why some of us get up in the morning. This is what helps keep Oregon. Statewide planning Goal 5 is implemented by Division 23, and I'm gonna kind of bounce through some of the standard and other pieces of the Goal 5 rule. It's primary process rule. You guys probably recall it lists a number of resources. I think there's around 15, and it tells you how to go about putting together a local program to furnish protection for these resources. Most of the local inventories were adopted in the 80s and 90s, so they're getting, in some cases, antiquated or out of date. The primary vehicle for helping counties update those was periodic review, which went away for counties in 1997. So without that tool, we've seen some of these programs become a little outdated. This is a picture of the Wow Lake and the East Moraine on the left-hand side here. This has been subject to a Goal 5 protection program at the local level. It's wildlife habitat, it's scenic, historic, it's open space. And it happened to be the first project I worked on as a professional planner, so it's kind of personal to me. Also, among other things, in Division 23, there are 15 subsections that describe 15 Goal 5 resources. This is just an example. Open space was the shortest one, so I could fit it all on one slide. But they all have a section so you've got scenic corridors and all number of things there. Getting into the standard Goal 5 process involves a number of important steps, and we'll talk a little bit about this right now. And if you remember anything, I'd ask you to remember, significant sites. It's about significant, and what constitutes significance. And to inform that, it requires an assessment of quality, quantity, and location, right? How good is it? How much of it is there, and where is it? So let's say mule deer, for example, which obviously is wildlife. We have an amount of really very good quality summer range We have a large quantity of that good quality summer range, and it's primarily located in upper elevations, often managed by federal agencies, so it's not susceptible to development pressures, right? So it's in pretty good shape. We also don't tend to worry about big game surviving the summers. They they tend to do okay. Winter range, on the other hand, is we do have some very good quality, not as much maybe as summer. We definitely have a sufficient amount to right now of good quality winter range. Again, not in the same kind of quality. It's usually located on lower elevations that are often privately owned and that are susceptible to development pressure. So, and we do worry about big game surviving the winter. So those things add up and say, well, that's probably an important policy choice. And we're learning more about migration corridors, right? We're learning more about the importance and the location of how they get from one range to the other. And we can have all of the high quality summer or winter range in the world, but if they can't get there, it doesn't really do us so much good. Just real quickly on this slide, we rely a lot of on our other state agencies to help with these questions. So we look at the biologists with ODF&W, and we look at Oregon Park and Resources departments, and we look at the State Historic Preservation Office, for example, or Department of State Lands. They really are our partners in this. Going through the next step, this is typically called the EC analysis, the economic, social, environmental, energy consequences. EC has been referred to, I've heard it referred to as our own mini NEPA. I don't know if that's true. I've never done a NEPA review, but I have heard that. And this is for the purpose of again, walking through identifying conflicting uses that could be detrimental to that resource, and then analyzing the consequences of fully allowing, partially allowing, or fully prohibiting those conflicting uses. And you can reach different conclusions there. If you're looking at the economic, social, environmental consequences, all those rolled into one, help inform your ultimate piece, which is develop a local program to achieve Goal 5. It's possible, rare but possible, that a significant resource could be determined unnecessary to be protected because the economic consequences are too high to do that, or the social consequences are too high to do that. It doesn't happen very often, but it's possible, and it does happen. The impact area could be different, again, with regard to different items. Let's say an eagle's nest, which is obviously a point on the landscape, could have a impact area, probably does have an impact area around it where or anything going on within that buffering would impact that nest, or more of a landscape or a district type situation like a riparian corridor or something that's actually mapped. It's more of a mapping rather than a point piece. Getting to the end of all that leads to the program to achieve Goal 5. Usually this means some level of regulatory arrangement. That is a comprehensive plan provisions, that express the choices that you've made and policies that you've chosen to execute, and then that are implemented through ordinances, zoning ordinances, that specify what's allowed, what's not allowed. Usually counties and cities tend to want to try to strike the balance. It's uncommon that they would either fully prohibit or fully allow. Usually it's partially allow, right? Usually it's allowing with mitigation, or allowing under certain circumstances, or allowing within a distance. There's zoning measures that would accompany that. They're usually overlay zones, like a big game winter range overlay zone that applies on top of the base zone, which might be exclusive farm use or forest use. It's not easy to do, right? If it was easy, then we wouldn't have to worry about updating these programs, because it'd be kind of self-executing. One of the aspects of Division 23, which was different from its predecessor, Division 16, was the advent of safe harbors, and that really is what it sounds like, right? It's an instance where the rule prescribes certain outcomes, and if a county or city chooses to avail themselves of that, then they're guaranteed to be in compliance with Goal 5. An example, riparian corridors or wetlands. So for instance, with a wetland or riparian corridor, excuse me, for a stream with a flow of greater than 1,000 cubic feet per second, 75-foot setback from top of bank, and you're guaranteed to be in compliance with Goal 5. You don't have to go through all that, what can be arduous and complicated and even controversial process. Okay, so that's kind of the setting, right? That's the background on the Goal 5 rule, which gets us to the greater sage grouse, right? And so we recognized early on that the Goal 5 and the Goal 5 rule probably were our vehicle to demonstrate that we've got adequate regulatory mechanisms. And we wrote this with the assistance of a Great Rules Advisory Committee. And this is some of the stuff right out of the introduction. But I wanted to emphasize it again. You know, fairness, predictability, and certainty is what we're hoping to accomplish. We did not intend, nor does the rule carry out prohibitions or strictly forbid any type of development. What it wants to do, and we hope it would do, is direct things into the right locations, into better locations. Now, the effect of proper application might be that some uses aren't fit to be at certain locations, but the rule, you get your day. An applicant would get their day to make that case before the local decision makers. And the other thing is how important our county government partners are, and it really is a partnership, and really has been a partnership. And I just, I'd feel like I haven't gotten everything if I didn't get that in. So here's how this works, right? This is a map of significant sage grouse habitat as it stands today, right? There's an area, the line delineated, so I believe it's a watershed boundary. Southeast Oregon, that's the tip of the Sagebrush Sea. And I've often thought about it, and I'll admit, I like to think about it as the universe and the constellations, which are these areas, and then the stars, right? Those red dots represent actual leks, which is the breeding ground. It's really the most important part of the survival of the species, the ability for them to attend to those leks, as well as be able to nest and carry out their life cycles, which are usually in close proximity there. The kind of the salmon color is the priority areas for conservation. That term is synonymous. I'd also ask you, on takeaways, that PACs and core areas are synonymous. They're talking about the same area, but they are the most important locations. They're developed based on science to try to identify the necessary landscape to support 90% of the population. So it's really an attempt to demarcate the smallest amount of land for the greatest amount of the species benefit. The EC process and conflicting use process was articulated in this rule rather than the standard process. So there was a declaration that said, just as there was a declaration that this map is significant. This is the significant habitat. There was commensurate items for conflicting uses, and it kind of rolled in a bit of an EC decision-making process. But large-scale development was the front and center issue. That was a term that was used by the Federal Service and by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and so we got at it and we wrote this rule. And I paraphrased here. We don't actually write rules that say land-intensive things or tall things, but that's what we were getting at, right? And it was that large-scale development that was concerning, and it was large-scale development in the types of activities that were described, whether it's infrastructure or energy development or mining. And we thought through that and realized, it's really about the characteristics of these uses. Sage grouse don't care if it's a wind tower. It's that they're hardwired to avoid anything that resembles a perching opportunity. They don't care what it is. It's just, but if it's tall, they're gonna stay away from it. You know, same with an aggregate quarry. They don't have a bias against aggregate quarries, but a large scale land intensive use erodes their habitat, their ability to use that habitat. So we tried to really kind of think about it in that way and come up with some general descriptions or ways to kind of codify tall thing 50 feet or over. We had a lot of conversation about that. What's a tall thing? Is it a telephone pole? Is it a fence post? What is it? We said 50 feet, and folks said we think that's right. Generation traffic. You know, most traffic engineers, I believe, will prescribe about 10 trips per day per household within an urban area. 50 trips a day is something that generates traffic. Land intensive is 5 acres or more, which again is about 5 times what a county assessor assigns to a rural household. So we kind of use that as a bit of a metric, and it worked out, I think, pretty well. As a companion, we tied it to this list of uses in your Division 33 rule, agricultural lands rule. And I had I had intended to give you an example of what that really looked like. But that table includes all the uses that are allowed in an EFU zone based on the statute and the rules. And it categorizes them into, I believe there's 10 categories. And they're farm and forestry and natural resources and residential and commercial and mining and oil and gas exploration and outdoor activities and some others. Obviously, some of them are listed right here. So we said these are the 5 categories that we think most closely align with those items that were identified by the service. And so so within that, they're all of the uses that can be allowed are listed in that table. And that's just an example. Commercial uses. That's obviously that's a fragment of the table, but it lists these different types of activities. So I just asked you to remember that, you know, the table lists these activities, and on the on the left-hand column, you can see there's numbers and letters. Don't worry about the numbers, but the letters are significant. So an R means that use requires review. An A means that use is allowed. And so what we did was put these together, and basically something that has these characteristics and is in one of these categories and requires review is probably a large scale development and therefore conflicting use. So kind of a long way around the horn, but I hope to be able to kind of explain this in a way that makes sense. It wasn't arbitrary. There was a lot of thought into it. Other activities also can be conflicting uses that are not large scale development. Again, we went with, you know, uses that require a review. This is a different category. But also they have to be within a certain distance of a LEC, of an occupied or pending LEC, because that's where the female sage grouse tend to nest. They tend to nest within those distances, and that's, you know, that's based on science. And so the conversation was like, we don't want a house on top of a LEC, and everybody agreed to that. That's one of the things that everybody agreed to right out of the gate. And so we wanted to build that in, and we did. The kind of the regulatory epicenter of the rule is the mitigation hierarchy. It's not the only regulatory piece, but it's the most substantial one. And there's 3 things. Again, if you remember anything, I would ask you to remember that there's a mitigation hierarchy, and that the first 2 pieces of avoidance and minimization, counties decide. That's a purview of local government. You know, can it go somewhere else? Can you avoid this site? Can this use go somewhere else where it doesn't have to occupy sage-grouse habitat? Or can it be minimized? You know, do we reduce the footprint or hours of operation, things like that? If those things are applied and there are disturbances that remain unresponded to, then we get to compensatory mitigation. That's payment. But that is really what all of these are types of mitigation, right? It comes right down to it. We get to the bottom piece. That's a payment. that is how much you are disrupting sage-grouse habitat by this much, and this is the cost. So again, this is the mitigation hierarchy. First two are the county. The third piece, though, mitigation, we built a bridge to ODF&W's rules. And it's ODF&W that applies their formula and determines the compensatory amount. We thought it was pretty important for the biologists to do the biology. And so that's how that fit. And the third piece is this is a softer test for areas that are not in core habitat. In a low density area, didn't talk to you about as much. But there's recognition that not all that habitat, while it's all maybe significant, it's not all created equally. So in low habitat of lower importance, this test is applied a little more softly. So this table should, I believe, was included as an attachment to your staff report. And what this number represents is the amount of each one of these core areas / packs. There's 19 of them or 20 of them that are occupied by anthropogenic disturbance, human disturbance. This is pretty important because one of the policy choices that was supported and even in ways advocated for by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is that we do not want to get to 3% disturbance in any of these priority areas. The science proves, and to this day continues to prove, that at 3% disturbance, you get a serious degradation in habitat value. And so we don't want to get there. Now, the good thing is, as you see on the right-hand side here, is that we're way below that. We're way below that in all the packs. And to the extent that there's been development occurring out there, it's not even a rounding error at this point. I mean, it's really not very much. So we're in pretty good shape. Probably the biggest thing that sets this rule apart, this section of this rule apart from the other elements of Division 23 and the Goal 5, is it's directly applicable. So counties are obligated to directly apply the provisions of this rule. Now they can adopt their own local program. It needs to be demonstrated to have a commensurate level of protection. It needs to be approved by LCDC. No one's chosen to do that, but this rule is directly applicable. And I think this is an example of the latitude the commission has to kind of think about and consider different arrangements for accomplishing statewide planning goal 5. We talked a lot about this, and there's, it's at one point we're like, well, let's suspend it. Let's say if you don't do your own thing in 2 years, then this applies. And the county said no. And the reason why they said that is because of the importance and the short time we had because of the listing decision. We were facing a listing decision that was going to severely impact the livestock industry, which meant severely impact the economies in these towns and cities. So they said we don't want to risk that. And there was, anyway, it's pretty courageous. I thought it's pretty courageous on the part of that local leadership. The mapping has been updated. ODF&W, I thought, I was really proud of the effort that ODF&W staff that they went into, not just the mapping, but the outreach and the process they went to really touch base with landowners and jurisdictions and other partners, interest parties, and they realized, the original maps, 2011, that was the best science at that time. Well, we're out from there now, and we've learned some things. They've discovered new leks that they didn't know were there, and in some cases there's been some changes. So they did come up with new maps. These maps were approved by the Fish and Wildlife Commission in December of last year, just about a month ago. It does adjust the amounts and locations. I think the overall amount is about the same, but some of the locations have changed. And again, the important part here is that these maps, although they're new and they do represent the best available science right now, are not available for local decision makers to use until they're adopted by LCDC to replace the existing map. We're not proposing to do that today. We'll get there. We'll get to that probably in the next little bit. But I wanted to let you guys know that. Now it's different. These do apply. I think these would apply to the Energy Facility Siting Council or to Department of Geology, Mineral Industries, and other state agencies that preside over certain development, but they do not apply or they're not available for local government until LCDC attaches them to your rule. Here's the actual development approvals for 2023. And the cell tower in Malheur County is large scale development because it's over 50 feet in height. It's approved that the planner wasn't sure if it had been or would ever be built. Baker County reported a replacement dwelling and agricultural building. Those aren't actual conflicting uses. You know, those would actually not be conflicting uses, but they reported them, so we included them. I think it just goes, it kind of goes to show that we haven't had a prevalence of development out there in that landscape. That's what I've got, you guys. Thank you so much for your patience. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, John, for your presentation. We have ability to have public comment period. Is anybody signed up for public comment? No. And so with that, do the commissioners have any questions on the presentation? Commissioner Boyer, Vice Chair Lelak.
Thank you. Great work as always, John, and this is so important to us in Eastern Oregon. A couple of questions. One is, as I look at the map, do you know, do these boundaries extend into Idaho and south to Nevada and California? Do they continue to the same degree and similar protections that we have, or is it really confined to Oregon?
So, Chair Hello, Vice Chair Lelak, it would be similar in some ways and very different in other ways. Every state has gone about it in a different way. Wyoming, kind of pioneered the core habitat approach, which to that extent they're similar to Oregon. Of course, they don't have a land use program like we do. So, and furthermore, their motivation was frankly about protecting oil and gas development exploration. So they threw wind under the bus. But so it's to some extent that there certainly are maps. The Bureau of Land Management, I can guarantee you, has maps that resemble those. How they've been used at the state level, I honestly don't know for sure.
Thank you. And just another question is, I appreciate your tracking the development approvals. Do you have a sense of how many applications may have been either proposed or not formally proposed because they learned about it and then they withdrew? Just the interest in development activity that may not be reflected in the chart.
Chair Hello, Vice Chair Lelak, great question. We don't know for sure because we don't hear about them. Although, I have been personally told by county planning directors that yes, that happens, and that's what we hope would happen. That as developers are prospecting for sites, this helps them make their decisions. Like I can go here, but I'm probably going to be on the hook for compensatory mitigation, or I can go over there, and I don't have to do that. And so we don't necessarily learn about that, but it has happened. I've been told that yes, that does in fact happen.
I'm going to follow up on a question to Vice Chair. And so every year I feel like I learned something new. So now I had this question of when it was decided not to list the sage grouse on the Endangered Species Act as an endangered species. Was it that each state came up with their plan and then together all states were approved together? Or how did that work?
So thank you, Chair Lova. That's basically yes. So, but let me follow up on that a little bit more. So, every state was working on this, and there was some interaction, multi-state coordination. But the result was that often many of these states' programs were unique, and ours was very unique. And we were one of the last to get across the finish line with our program. But I think this is pretty significant. So LCDC adopted the sage grouse rule in early August. Councilor Shipsy and I drove to Burns, I think, that day. Early August 2015. The Fish and Wildlife Commission adopted some rules about a week or two later, also August 2015. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Secretary of the Interior, Sally Jewell, issued a decision that listing was not necessary in September 2015. So I think it's fair to say we slammed the door on that listing. They made their determination almost immediately after we presented our piece.
Commissioner Boyer.
Thank you. Great job, John. I like seeing the progress. And it's really interesting to see how far SageCon has come because there are a lot of hiccups in the beginning. There was a lot of administrative hiccups, I should say. So it's really neat to see that they're still moving forward. And this really doesn't fall into our purview, but I remember a presentation we had in Sisters at Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board meeting, and an organization came to us saying that the decline in sage grouse could be because there's not enough nutritional value out there for them. And they're eating the sagebrush, which does have no value for their system. So there's a plot we're going to go visit in Baker that it's been a test plot of wildflowers with the sage grouse. So we're going to do that. We're going to Baker in April. So I'm going to tour that and see there. It's kind of fascinating to me that they're thinking part of the decline is because there's not enough feed out there for them.
So thank you, Chair Holoba. Thank you, Commissioner Ford. Thank you for that observation. It is interesting, and we tend to, it's additive, right? We learn more and more. Baker County is interesting because they have a higher proportion of deeded land than most other counties. So a higher proportion of that sage grouse habitat is private land as opposed to land managed by the Bureau of Land Management. I don't know why I felt compelled to say that, but it's an interesting piece, I guess. To me, it's interesting.
Vice Chair Leland.
Sorry, just one other comment. It's great work to protect what we have with sage grouse, and hopefully the populations are robust and thrive. And I appreciate that this is a balancing act that we continuously talk about with property owners and ranchers and wildlife and the habitat, because we have another species that we're also working to coexist with in Eastern Oregon in particular now, and that's wolves. And so you don't need to respond, but just be aware that, our Eastern Oregon counties are tackling many species and attempting to coexist. And I'm proud to say our county we have a wolf depredation and financial assistance advisory committee, and I help co-staff that, and it's very important. In some cases, we're working with similar or different ranchers and large-scale property owners as we work with many species, and we're continuously looking for the balance, right? Whether it's regulations or it's practices, whatever the case may be. So I just think it's incumbent upon me as the representative from Eastern Oregon just to bring that awareness to the commission and to the staff.
So Chair Holoba, Vice Chair Lulak, I thank you. I think it's a really on-point observation. I will say we have not been having conversations about LCDC wolf rule. But ODF&W's been talking about for decades, and they've been really, they've really gained some ground on what it means to, have wolves in this state. But I'll just use that as an opportunity to say this: we avoided a listing last time. There's no guarantee that the service won't get another petition for listing. In fact, a lot of people think it's imminent. I don't know about that, but I have heard that. And so to the extent that happens, this rule, I think, gives Oregon a leg up on, again, demonstrating that not here, we're doing just fine. We're doing okay. So thanks for indulging me.
Commissioners, any other questions? Okay. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Next, we're going to hear on agenda item number 7, rulemaking housing capacity analysis with Marie Valencia Aguilar, Senior Housing Planner, Thea Croman, Housing Policy Analyst, and Celestina Teva, Housing Planner, and then Ethan Stuckmeyer, Housing Service Division Manager. I believe Marie will start the presentation online. There she is. And then Thea, Celestina, and Ethan, please come to the presentation table, which you're already doing. And I will, take me a while to read this. As soon as we get situated, I'll switch it to you, Marie. Turn it over to Marie.
All right. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon, Chair Halova, Vice Chair Lilac, and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Mari Valencia Aguilar, and I am a housing planner with the department. I use she or they pronouns. Apologies that I couldn't be with you all in person, but I am recovering from a cold and wanted to keep my gross germs away. So hopefully next time I can be there in person. Today for this presentation, I am joined by my colleagues in person, Thea Croman, Celestina Teva, and of course, our Housing Services Division Manager, Ethan Stuckmeyer. We will be presenting on this agenda item, and they'll introduce themselves in their segment of the presentation. We are here to provide the Commission with an update to the Housing Capacity Analysis Schedule. Could I get someone to go to the next slide, please? Great, thank you. So here on this slide, you see kind of an overview of what our presentation will entail. I'll begin by briefly updating the commission, you all, with some general housing team updates and some programmatic updates. Then I'll turn it over to Thea and Celestina, who will kind of take the bulk of this presentation and honestly did the bulk of the work to describe the important elements that informed the proposed updated housing capacity analysis schedule as reflected in attachment A of your packet for this agenda item 7. And then we'll have opportunity for public comment. And lastly, we will be requesting action from the commission on this agenda item. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So quickly, I wanted to take the time to spotlight our colleague Celestina Teva once more. You all learned under the director's report agenda item that she was kind of our latest addition to the Housing Services Division, and she started back in November. And quickly, she is before you all presenting, which is exciting, and just wanted to kind of give another spotlight to Celestina at this point in time, and we're excited to have her. Also, I do want to provide a kind of programmatic update and specifically focus on the Housing Production Strategy Program. Typically at this annual routine of the Housing Capacity Analysis Schedule, we also take the time to provide you all with updates on kind of progress and outcomes on the Housing Production Strategy Program. However, we won't be doing that at this time as part of this presentation. Instead, we're going to wait and push that out until April. And the reason being is because we are still underway with the first year of the program. We're going to wrap up kind of our review and decisions on the last few housing production strategies that have been adopted at the local level at the end of next month. And so by pushing the update to April, we're able to kind of come back to you all and provide a more holistic overview of progress and outcomes in the first year. We're also going to engage in discussions with various partners to also gain their feedback on how the first year went for them. And so we'll be able to kind of fold that into our update in April as part of the Housing Production Strategy update. So a quick teaser only at this time is that there are 11 housing production strategies adopted at the local level. We've reviewed 9 out of 2, and all of the ones we've reviewed have been adopted with conditions and just 2 more pending. And so the first year is underway and you know, very positive things to come and share with you next in the next few months. So with that, if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So today, the purpose of our meeting is to overview updates that have been made to OAR Chapter 660, Division 8, subsection 45, which describes the housing capacity analysis schedule. This body originally adopted this schedule in November of 2020. We are simply kind of doing a routine update of the schedule as reflected in attachment A, and nothing in Division 8 is changing. So no, we're not making any rule amendments in Division 8 at this point in time. It's just kind of updating the schedule. The schedule captures the deadlines by which local governments that are required by statute to develop and adopt housing capacity analysis and housing production strategy reports kind of ongoing. And, you know, in partnership with the local governments, we're tracking these efforts. And so attachment A reflects our team's kind of tracking of the work at the local level. And so, of course, in light of this, we will request the commission take action to vote to adopt attachment A at the end of the presentation, and we'll have some sample language available at the time for you all to kind of lean on. If we can go to the next slide, please. Great. So before I kind of hand it off to Celestina and to Thea to take the bulk of the presentation on the housing capacity analysis, I did want to offer just a quick reminder, light touch overview of our statewide planning goal 10, or housing goal. I think it's kind of a good way to kind of start this presentation, just ensuring that we're all kind of on the same page on the inner workings of Goal 10. And so as Thea and Celestina kind of talk about the nuggets of Goal 10, you'll be able to kind of follow along. And this commission is experts in this goal, so maybe this is not needed, but I thought it'd be a great way to just ensure common understanding regardless. So Goal 10 is the statewide planning goal that kind of directs local governments on how to plan for housing and communities over a 20-year planning horizon. Over the last few years, we have seen some changes to this goal, notably in under House Bill 2003 back in 2019, and then most recently in the long 2023 legislative session with the passage of House Bill 2001, or what is also called or referred to as the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Policy. What you see here on the screen is a graphic depiction of statewide planning goal 10. Light blue icons are kind of the original components of the goal 10 paradigm since it was kind of established in the 70s, but then also housing production strategy, which was added back in 2019 under House Bill 2003. And I've noted the HCA and the HPS in red because that's kind of the focus of what Celestina and Thea will be discussing. But then going back to the graphic, darker blue icons are changes that have been made to Goal 10, informed by House Bill 2001 or the ONA policy. And so Thea will kind of talk about the impacts of the ONA policy to the schedule. But what I'll say on that is that we are, as you all know, in rulemaking to operationalize the direction of these new components to our Goal 10 planning system, specifically the ONA pieces, so the dark blue. Kind of stepping back and quickly talking about the way that this all works, it's really starting off with the statewide allocation of housing need. And really that's intended to consider housing dynamics and a shared responsibility across all communities in Oregon. Local governments then take this housing need that to help inform their housing capacity analysis and housing production strategy work. And local governments who have a population of at least 10,000 are doing the HCA or the HPS on a periodic schedule, which is why we have attachment A. Local governments inside the Portland Metro region are on a 6-year cycle, and those outside of the Portland Metro region are on an 8-year cycle. And HCA specifically is really a technocratic exercise that helps the city kind of determine if they have enough land to meet their housing need over over the 20-year planning horizon. And then if there is a shortfall in housing capacity, they have to do something about it. They start by thinking through efficiency measures that help them, grow up before growing out. And then, of course, if a need is identified, a UGB might be an option, an urban growth boundary amendment. But following kind of a housing capacity analysis is the housing production strategy. And that really is a game plan or an action plan that helps the city articulate meaningful, actionable tools, policies, strategies that will help address housing production, housing affordability, and housing choice. So that kind of moves us through the first, most of the icons you see on the screen there. And there is now evaluation and monitoring on progress made on these important housing planning efforts. Attachment A is really kind of that schedule that depicts how cities are meeting these obligations in terms of a timeline. And so I will kind of leave it there. That is the highest level overview of Goal 10, I think. But hopefully it's helpful. And I'll hand it over to Thea and Celestina to kind of take us into the housing capacity analysis schedule.
Okay. Hi, Chair Halava, Vice Chair Lilac, and members of the commission. For the record, I'm Thea Croman, Housing Policy Analyst with the department. I'm really happy to be here with you today. I'm laughing because the graphic on this mic makes it look like you have to eat the microphone to do it correctly. So I think you can hear me without eating the microphone. Okay. It's getting close to afternoon nap time, so I am gonna try to keep this real fun. I think it's super fun. So we're here to talk about the regular rulemaking that we come to you each January to do. We come to this body to present annual updates to this schedule, cyclical updates, and to sort of identify cities that have passed the 10,000 population mark. This year, Attachment A includes some extra elements that result from legislative action in the 2023 session. And we'll talk about each of these more, but just to note that some of the additional considerations include HB 2001, which impacts the data that cities use to identify and to respond to a housing need per the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis policy. It also adds Senate Bill 406, which essentially added all jurisdictions within Tillamook County to the HCA schedule. So for the purpose of Goal 10 housing planning, every jurisdiction in Tillamook County are essentially considered large cities. And again, we'll talk about that more down the slides. Oh, this one says forward. It was working before. Got it. Okay, so in terms of cyclical updates, just some numbers for y'all. There were 16 HCA deadlines in 2023. That's inside and outside of Metro. HCA, again, housing capacity analysis. There were 9 cities that received technical assistance funding from DLCD. 13 local governments adopted their HCAs. And there are 4 cities working on mutually agreed upon modified timelines. And we'll tell you about that a little bit more later. If you're noticing that math doesn't quite add up, there's a reason. It's a little not important, but if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it later. just a note here that each of these cities, is really in a unique circumstance. And although they fit into these categories pretty cleanly, the regional reps and the housing staff are really committed to responding to each individual city according to their needs. And so, when we look at that, each one of these little blue boxes has a full story. Moving on to slide 3. So going forward into the next cycle of HCAs, we wanted to talk about how HB 2001 and the integration of the ONA policy is really transformative for Goal 10 and what that means for the HCA schedule in particular. These are the components, and the gray boxes, the components that are changing. So some live in DLCD and is work that we'll be asking the commission to participate in with us. Others, as you can see, sort of live in the Office of Economic Analysis and in OHCS, and we're partnering with them together collectively. There is a statutory deadline for January 1st of 2025 for all of this work, as Ethan mentioned this morning. And the point here is that this work will ensure that local governments have the data they need, information they need to really succeed in housing planning at the local level. All of this is to say that without that new data that all of these agencies are working on developing, some jurisdictions don't have what they need right now to complete a statutorily compliant HCA. So one of the impacts that you're seeing on the in the HCA update this year is our attempt to ensure that cities are able to do statutorily compliant housing analysis. All of that is background for the schedule on attachment A that you're going to see is kind of shifting significantly this year. So cities essentially following the HCA schedule in good faith, we noticed, could end up in legal hot water because they're using outdated data. There's sort of this donut hole. While we're waiting for the data to catch up, and yet cities are still sort of just moving forward according to the schedule that they've been assigned. So we wanted to ensure, and recognizing not we, but the bill language essentially grants LCDC authority to adjust those deadlines for the jurisdictions that would, end up in that donut hole, particularly by extending the existing rules out until 2027 for those jurisdictions. What this meant on our side was that housing staff and regional representatives sort of had to step back and assess the status of each one of the cities within the Goal 10 program and figure out which of these categories they fit into. So those with deadlines of 2027 or later are sort of safe. They are not within the period that we're concerned about. Those with HCA deadlines between 2024 and 2026 that had not started were allowed to shift back to 2027 to the point where they will have the correct data, the updated data to work with. Those with Goal 10 work like currently underway, so they've already started this analysis, are what we will be asking if the commission is going to consider is if you'll extend the rules, essentially the old rules or the current rules, to allow those cities to finish their Goal 10 work in this period. And I'm going to hand it off to Celestina now to talk about some of the other components within attachment A, and then we'll come back to this conversation at the end.
Sounds great. Thank you, Thea. Hello, everybody. One more time, Celestina Teva, housing planner. And thank you, Chair, for having us today. So just for a moment, I'm going to touch on one other item that you're going to see in your attachment that we haven't yet spoken about. and that's Metro Regional Government's presence on the schedule. That's new this year, also due to recent legislation that adds a layer of participation for the regional government that's different, but in many ways similar, but certainly different than the obligations of the cities, and that's the housing coordination strategy. Election to put them on the schedule was made in partnership with Metro, and they wanted to demonstrate their commitment as well to this planning work and planning for housing in the state. So you will see Metro's housing coordination strategy deadlines listed newly again on that attachment A. Really, that's the gist of it. They're in Metro, and so their deadlines are on a 6-year cycle, like all of the cities who are doing their HCA and HPS work also on a 6-year cycle. Like I mentioned before, many of their considerations are similar to those of cities, but they're really taking a regional approach. So rather than looking at housing production strategies that a city might employ, they're the convener, and they're thinking about what tools do they have in terms of compatibility and really the convening regional layer of this work. So really glad to be able to add them into the schedule this year. Additionally, as Thea mentioned early on, annually part of this work is to ensure that we are working with all of the cities who need to be in this program, and that's cities with populations above 10,000. So every year in January, we look at the PSU Population Research Center's report from the previous year to see if any new cities have crossed that population threshold, and there are none this year. So very simple. Senate Bill 406, and thank you for sticking with me as we jump around. There are kind of a number of elements to this schedule update that may not flow very well. So thank you for letting me jump around with you. As we heard, Senate Bill 406 last year brought Tillamook County's jurisdictions into the fold of this work, separate from the large city, medium city, small city designations. So they are also newly on your schedule. That includes all of the cities in the county, and there were also a number of communities explicitly named in the bill, and so those communities are also listed in aggregate on your schedule, and they've all been slotted in partnership with the jurisdictions and through our regional rep Brett Estes with a 2027 deadline. And here, we'll go back a little bit to looking at our 2023 work and kind of where we are with those cities. And so we've got 4 cities that we are working in partnership with to modify their schedules. So we're highlighting this because this is one of the elements that is perhaps more relevant as you're adopting a new schedule. And we have 3 cities who have moved in a way that isn't consistent with the schedule that you adopted last year. So we have 3 cities who we've identified and modified schedule with. And so that's the first stage of working with a city who missed their deadline for any number of reasons. We know that some cities have had capacity constraints and turnover. We even have some circumstances where, because of sequential UGB amendments, there is not only a request, but perhaps even a suggestion from DLCD that a schedule amendment be made. So we have 3 cities, McMinnville, Fairview, and Wilsonville, with whom a modified schedule has been created with DLCD staff, and we're moving forward with that. The next layer of support for deadlines is the intergovernmental agreement. So we have 1 city who we are in the process of finalizing intergovernmental agreement with. That is Pendleton. So for those of you who were here a couple of years ago during the HCA schedule adoption, they had been originally slated for 22, and then we did a modified schedule for 23. And without making that deadline, we are now in partnership with them to and almost finishing up an intergovernmental agreement so that gets completed this year. Beyond that, we don't have any cities who we're working with in either of the latter 2 steps in the accountability and support process. So nothing to report for you there. And we're hopeful that if we can continue to work with the cities in partnership, that we'll be able to move forward with future schedule adoptions, really only needing the first two tools in this accountability process. And with that, we have this text heavy slide for you, which you all have in your binders, which is the attachment A. For those of you, again, who were here last year or years prior, you will see that we went with a different format. As the list gets longer of our jurisdictional partners, we just switch things up a little bit. So hopefully the readability is there for you all. And with that, unless you have anything to add, Ethan, I will hand it over to you, Chair Halava.
Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to see if there was any public comment. Anybody signed up for public comment? No public comment. Okay, so I'll open up to the commissioners for questions on the presentation. Commissioner Lazo.
Thanks, Chair Halava. And thanks, Thea, for pointing out this graphic. Now, every time I look at it, it actually looks like if you do the mic properly, that you get like a little spray of mouthwash or something. I'm anticipating that. All right, I have a number of questions. One is on the graphic with the that showed all the different partners, OEA and OHCS. I'm wondering if because it's part of potentially the HPS process, if we should also identify that OHCS has the responsibility for the equity dashboard. So that's another piece that for the HPS one.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. The other is I like the format of the schedule. What I'm curious about is if there would be a way to convey, and at this point, not today, but to convey, actually it is for today, what has changed for some people's schedules? And I don't know if there's if there's an easy way for you to tell us. So, and it sounds like in the three categories, it's particularly for the folks who, one page that showed the three categories of people. I think it's for the first category, right? That had the changes.
It's the
2020. Let's see here.
So
No, 27 or later, no changes probably. So the group that was 24 to 26 is the one that is most likely had changes, right? Okay. And so, and those are the folks that all got moved to 27, but not everybody in 27 would have come from that group, because there would have been some folks who are naturally would have been in the 27 group. Okay. So it would be identifying those ones that moved from 24 to 26 into 27. And then similarly in the third category for the currently underway, were there any of those folks that opted in to being under the new rules, or did they all opt to continue to produce their HCA under the old rules?
Mari, do you want to take that?
Happy to take that. Thank you, Chair Halava, Vice Chair Lilac, and Commissioner Lazo for the questions. I will attempt to do my best in terms of, I believe there was a question related to how to 2024 through 2027, which is kind of the bucket area where we saw the most movement of cities on the schedule, and kind of showing that. I think we can. It just will get really, really busy. But if that is a direction, we're happy to be responsive to that. There are nuances even within that, but it is possible that we can attempt to kind of graphically show that in a way that we can see kind of how that changed from last year's adopted schedule to what is currently what we're tracking this year. And now I believe the next question was around whether any of the local governments have decided to kind of incorporate these new components that are informed by House Bill 2001 or the ONA policy, and the answer is yes. We actually kind of the basis for applying that 2027 deadline was very much for this particular point, in that the city of Eugene was very much interested in you know, they were a city who's underway in their housing in their housing planning work, but very interested in kind of applying the ONA allocation of housing need. And thinking and also using some of the kind of new rules and directions around the various components of the ONA policy, whether it be the BLI, whether it be the housing production strategy, you know, just taking those pieces that will ultimately be the paradigm once we're complete with the ONA policy in January 1st of 2027. To able to apply all of that. So yes is the answer. The city of Eugene is one. City of Bend is another one that we might name at this point in time. I believe that hopefully I responded to most questions. Otherwise, I'll let kind of others in the room also be responsive too.
Chair, if I could, yeah, thank you, Commissioner Lazo. Mari's right. There are jurisdictions who are interested in blending these approaches, right? There's a key element here, though, which is the legality of relying on a housing capacity analysis that is not using or is trying to blend those approaches, right? HB 2001 adopted with an emergency clause. The statutes changed the day that the governor signed the bill. And the question, and that fundamentally changed the baseline estimate of needed housing for those local governments. And so if you're planning for needed housing in a way under the ONA paradigm where the data is not yet available, the numbers have not been produced, which is the new basis for planning for needed housing, there's a question at the end of that housing capacity analysis process about if you do find a deficit in a local government in terms of zone capacity, and you're basing a UGB amendment on data that does not yet exist, there's a legal risk associated with that process. So we're working closely with those local governments to thread that needle the best that they can, knowing that the policy basis of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis process gets us to a more true sense or kind of dives deeper into the policy of housing planning.
Commissioners. Vice Chair Leela.
Thank you. Just looking at Tillamook County, it's interesting that they've all opted in. Does it require a statutory change for communities under the thresholds to opt in and to participate? And I guess just the follow up is, and are you hearing of any additional interest by any other smaller cities and or counties with all cities included? I'm just curious.
Chair Halava, Vice Chair Lilac, thanks for the question. Did I hear you correctly? You're speaking about Tillamook, the Tillamook County jurisdictions?
Correct. And I'm just curious if other smaller communities that don't meet those thresholds, does it take a statutory change for them to be entered into to participate in the program and then of course receive the corresponding funding, I assume.
Sure.
And then that's one question. And the other is, are you hearing of any other interest?
Yeah, to my knowledge, and please anybody else jump in, we have not heard of any interest from any of the smaller cities. And just to be sure, the Senate Bill 406 required their participation. It is not an opt-in from the Tillamook cities. Yeah.
And Chair, if I could elaborate. Yeah, so Senate Bill 406 requires, in fact, amend statute to say cities above population 10,000 and jurisdictions within Tillamook County are subject to these rules and must comply with everything therein. That does not, being included on the schedule does not preclude a local government from conducting something like a housing capacity analysis or housing production strategy. In fact, we feel like that's good planning for a jurisdiction, and the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis produces the data to be informative to that process should a city voluntarily enter into Goal 10 planning and all the fun within that process. And we've funded several projects in jurisdictions smaller than 10,000 to do housing capacity analysis and housing production strategies or things like those reports in the past and even now.
Steve Shipsey.
Vice Chair, Goal 10 and Tillamook County are unique in that Goal 10 is generally not something that counties do. They leave it to areas inside UGBs, but Tillamook County went in their in their comprehensive plan, they have a goal 10 element, and it speaks to all of these, both the unincorporated QD and the smaller cities within the county. So it may be a completely unique circumstance.
Thank you. It's just interesting because I couldn't help just looking up the legislative history quickly on Senate Bill 406 to see all the support for it, including from city manager, for example, from Rockaway Beach. And just, I was just curious to see some of that background, and great to see additional interest by smaller communities. Thank you.
I think Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. I wonder if the fact that I hear from my colleagues in Tillamook County that the rate of home ownership in Tillamook County is changing by 1% a year to be people who live outside of Tillamook County. So that the accommodation that was made to increase the amount of housing that's required was impacted by the shift in ownership, as well as by the fact that the incorporated areas are in the northern half of Tillamook County, and the whole southern half of Tillamook County doesn't have incorporated areas. So I would consider both of those factors impacting this, but that's a hunch on my part. I don't know if it's accurate.
Commissioner Boyer.
So I look at attachment A, and I wish this could all be spread out more. I just feel for you guys. In 2028, is it? I mean, there's 37 different things to review. I know you're rock stars, but I feel for you. That's a lot. I wish there was a way it could be spread out a little bit more for your sake. And with that being said, the Tillamook, the graph with the Tillamook counties, being their first time, how confident are you that they'll be able to do these back to back in these years? I mean, that seems a lot for a first time round. So 2027, 2028, 2027, they're all doing the HCAs, and 2028, they're all doing the HPS.
Chair Holova and Commissioner Boyer, thank you for the question. You're right that they are back to back, but I'll say that these are sort of the HCA and the HPS are two elements of the same process. So the way it's set up is that they actually, the HPS builds off of the HCA. It's intentionally designed for the HCA to fall in the year before the HPS, because the HCA essentially collects the data that you need in order to respond to the housing need. So you collect the data within, that's sort of the fact finding part of the project, and then you identify strategies to respond to that data in the HPS. So while it is going to be a big lift for them and for us, it is a designed process, and we will be hopefully providing a lot of support in the form of funding and consultants and technical assistance on our end to help those cities accomplish those analytical elements.
Thank you for explaining it like that. I get it. And I'm not a housing person, so this is where I'm my weakest. So I'm still learning that. So thank you. The fact finding and then strategic, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely appreciate the question.
I had two questions. One was, and I think it was said, but I might not have caught it properly, is the changes with the House Bill 2001 last year. We're really going from the city by city approach to a regional approach. And I feel like I just missed where the regional part happens. I think I got it from the Metro and maybe from the Tillamook, but I didn't know how else the regional part. I feel like it was said. I just didn't quite get it.
Chair Love, that's a good question. So the underlying basis of HB 2001 and the ONA is that local governments in the past, pre HB 2001, would do, when they started their Goal 10 process, would conduct an analysis of their 20-year housing need. And that included using data on past development trends, changing demographics, change in population, change in household headship rates, all of those kind of things. But Oregon Housing Needs Analysis changes that and says the state would do that estimation on behalf of local governments, because the state, and doing that analysis at a regional level, you can bring in other elements of need, things like people experiencing homelessness, the underproduction of housing, the impact of second vacation homes. And you can then, from that point, by doing that at a regional level, allocate that need to local governments in a manner that is kind of that fair and equitable distribution or allocation of housing need, and taking that kind of more regionalized approach to, we can, if we're all in partnership together, we can actually move the needle on that, on accommodating the housing needs. So that's the change in HB 2001 from the old paradigm.
Follow up on there. What is the body that does the allocating?
Good question. So under HB 2001, the Office of Economic Analysis through the Department of Administrative Services is the entity that would conduct the methodology and do the allocation in consultation with DLCD and Oregon Housing Community Services. And then in terms of the actual implementation and the kind of the policy side of things, the programmatic elements of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, DLCD and OHCS are in a much more active role than OEA, the Office of Economic Analysis.
And so that is the allocation part is the thing that's happening in this 2025, 2026 that shifted everybody to 2027 so they can get that allocation in order to do their capacity analysis. Correct. In order to do their housing production strategy. Correct.
The date that the first allocation will be published is January 1st of 2025.
Okay. And then the last question I had was, I noticed dashboard on the graphics. And so I feel like I'm making assumptions about what dashboard is, but I just wanted to clarify. Is dashboard the publishing and comparison of everybody's housing production strategies in a way that you can be like, what is this city doing versus this city? Is that what dashboard is?
I wish. It is not. The dashboard, there's two elements of that dashboard. I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's going to be one, URL that you visit that has both of these elements. But the housing production dashboard is a dashboard that visualizes and shows the overall production of housing in certain types of housing in the state of Oregon. You could look it up by local government. You could look it up by potentially region. You could sort by housing type, by housing need, affordability level. And that's a mechanism to track progress over time.
The goal and then.
Yeah, right. It would have both target and progress.
Because there was a point at which we talked about a one-stop shop to anybody actually being able to see what is the city doing versus what right. Is that city said they're going to do versus like kind of find it on the internet.
Right. Yeah, that is unfortunately not part of the dashboard at this time.
Yeah. Any other clarifying questions, Commissioner Lazo?
Thanks, Chair. I want to bring a couple pieces to revisit. I know that there was a little bit of talk that related to Tillamook County and SB 406 and that list of folks about the unincorporated areas, and just remind folks that there's a parallel process happening right now around urban unincorporated areas that will be included in this process. And actually, because I have in my email here the legislative concept for it that is being worked on right now by Representative Dexter's office. And actually, what I'm not seeing though, in this is actually what the implementation date for that is. And so when will these folks? Do you know when they're going to be added to this list? That's one thing I'll say. I'll give you a moment to think about it. But the other thing I'll say about the sense that there's a lot of stuff happening in 2027 that, as Ethan said, is really driven by when the allotments will come out, is that for folks who have been involved in this conversation, it seems like a long way off. I mean, these are conversations that started in 2018. So to see the first HCAs under this new process not come out until 27, it is also like, oh my gosh, it feels, I thought we were going to be doing something before then. So I would encourage us to resist the temptation to keep pushing anything off in this process. it'll seem like a lot and it will be a lot. But it is a paradigm shift that has been a long time coming. And we're so appreciative of the work it will take to make that shift.
Chair Lova and Commissioner Laza, yeah, you're exactly right. I think 2027 is even a long time from now. And what I think is going to be interesting to see, I think for our sake, and hopefully this happens, is that as soon as those housing production targets are published in 2025, cities will begin, we're funding technical assistance projects to get cities part of the way there, and they can just take that number and kind of run with it, fairly quickly. I know some cities are in that camp in terms of saying, let's like get to as far as we can get now under the legal paradigm, and then just kind of move along and finish up pretty quickly. So hopefully we'll see some of those first housing capacity analyses and housing production strategies end of 2025, at the end of 2026. So we don't have to wait really even that long, and that maybe spreads the load a little bit.
It sounds like what you're saying, that some folks might turn their homework in early.
And that's not new. We've seen that even in the current.
Yeah, that's true. The missing middle housing rules. Any other questions for commissioners? No.
I just
Vice Chair Lilac.
Thank you. Chair, maybe it's because I'm on the coast and I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking still Tillamook County, and I look right past you and I see Brett. And I think about the housing capacity analysis and all this housing planning in these small coastal communities. And I think about the balancing act with the tsunami inundation zone, goal 7 and other goal 5, and what we've just experienced here with our tour yesterday. I can just imagine on some of these communities, it's a real balancing act to meet the housing need. And it's great that there's a desire to do so. And then all of these other factors, and I didn't even mention infrastructure and the geology and so many different factors that they must have pretty robust teams that are working together. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that. Since we're at the coast, I thought I would ask the question.
I feel like you should just get that.
I guess I'll jump in and invite others to do so, but Vice Chair Lilac, I think that's really where, and Palmer mentioned this too in the director's report, about as we're endeavoring on new programs and new policy changes that are substantial in a way that is requiring local governments to continually dedicate time to conduct those new activities and understand that. We continue to advocate for additional technical assistance funding for that to build capacity in those local governments. But, that doesn't always go far enough to say, oh yes, also balance these other, crises that you're experiencing at the same time. So it's trying to lend a hand to those local governments to do that work and be a partner in that process. But I'm very interested to hear what Regional Representative Brett Estes has to say on that topic.
Chair Halava, Vice Chair Lilac. For the record, Brett Estes, I'm the North Coast Regional Representative. So to answer the question, Vice Chair, I'm going to say that after passage of Senate Bill 406 and the housing staff and myself have been working with the various jurisdictions, I'm going to say that there's optimistic nervousness as we move into this. Everyone is still very much on board in moving forward with this, but it's a new process that these jurisdictions are having to go through. I'll say that through this last housing grant cycle, we've been able to provide all the jurisdictions within Tillamook County, including Tillamook County, with housing grant assistance to do their code update work. And so that process will be starting here soon. They are working together collaboratively. There is a housing commission in Tillamook County, which is working to shepherd a lot of these efforts collaboratively. And the jurisdictions are kind of going in arm to be able to move forward with this work. in having the conversations about this new schedule with the individual jurisdictions about the 2027 deadline, we recognize that there is another biennium potential grant cycle for them to be able to apply for additional housing funds. We can't commit that they would be receiving anything, but there's a potential opportunity to be able to do the work for the housing capacity analysis and to be able to provide them with some resources to be able to do this work. I will also note that they have an excellent county planning director, Sarah Absher, who is working with the individual jurisdictions. Some of them are don't have staff planners. They may have contract planners, but working with them to be able to, and their city managers, to be able to help bring things along. I see optimism as they move forward, understanding this is a new endeavor that they're undertaking.
Thank you. I just think it's so great to support them, just given this, and Sarah is remarkable. And I know that, I don't think she has a public hearing that's not packed with people with interest on all sides. And there's just a lot of issues. So thank you to the department for really supporting them in this process, and hopefully it's successful.
Yeah, and Vice Chair Lee, I mean, we've both, all the housing staff and myself have been said we're going to be there with them along the way to be able to assist and answer questions and to be able to provide guidance as we can along the way.
I think I'd open up to deliberation or a motion. Any thoughts for deliberation? Commissioner Lazo.
I'll just make a motion if folks are ready.
Just share.
All right. I move that the Land Conservation and Development Commission adopt updates to the attachment in Oregon Administrative Rule, Chapter 660, Division 8, Section 45, as drafted in attachments A and Agenda Item 8.
Somebody like to make a second, to do a second?
Am I allowed to do that? Because I would love to do that.
Yeah.
Second.
Commissioner Thompson seconds. Jan, please call the roll.
Commissioner Warren.
Aye.
Commissioner Boyer. Aye. Commissioner Lazo.
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Lilac. Chair Halova.
Aye. And with that, the motion passes. And so now we're going to take a break for 15 minutes. We are supposed to start the next item at 2:45, which is actually half an hour from now. I don't know, should we advance it to 2:30 or was there somebody? The next is public comment, so we should probably wait.
Well, I think we're gonna definitely. I'm happy to. I'll be providing kind of a lot of things, but we're also trying to.
Okay, so we're gonna take a break and be back at 2:30 for public comment. Agenda item number 8. We're starting, commissioners. No. it's okay. So, we're starting. Oh. There you go. The little hollow with the plastic. Or is this plastic? I don't know. I wanted to verify that it's okay to start public comment at this time. Okay. So, welcome back. We're about to start agenda item number 8, which is public comment. And I hear we have someone virtually that will be giving public comment.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Robert Liberty's with us.
Okay, and we'd like to put a timer, I think 5 minutes. Do we have anybody else who's joining us in person or virtually?
No.
Okay, thank you. Do you have the ability to put the clock?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Helava, and good afternoon, members of the commission. I'm Robert Liberty, as you know, speaking on my own behalf. I had hoped to be able to attend your meeting in person, but conflicting schedules made that impossible. I'm prompted to offer this testimony at your meeting today because of its location and because you'll be spending time tomorrow morning with your South Coast Field Representative, Huy Radomski. Late last August, Mr. Radomski organized a filming of the recollections of the origins, decision, and resolution of the Oregon Supreme Court's 1986 decision in 1000 Friends of Oregon v. LCDC and Curry County. I joined former Curry County Planning Director Chuck Nordstrom, former Curry County Legal Counsel Jerry Herbage, Ms. Radomski, and John Jennings at Chuck Nordstrom's home in Langlois for a video recording session about the case. Former senior planner at the department, Michael Rupp, is helping to polish the final product. It was a surprisingly enjoyable day, especially for me. I learned much of the backstory that I never knew. And of course, it was a great excuse to visit the magnificent South Coast, which is another reason I'm sorry not with you today. It's understandable, but a mistake to interpret that case as just holding that urban uses are not allowed in exception areas outside urban growth boundaries. The correct holding is that development outside of urban growth boundaries had to meet your definition of rural lands, which were areas of, quote, sparse settlement, small farms, or acreage home sites. Regardless of arguments over what various words in your goals meant, limiting development outside UGBs to sparse settlement is good policy. It's logically consistent not just with goals 3, 4, and 14, but also goals 5, 6, 7, 11, 16, 17, and 18, and limiting climate change impacts. During the 1980s and 1990s, I repeatedly asked the Commission to implement the Supreme Court's holding through rulemaking in order to create some sideboards for proposed upzonings of residential exception areas, secondary lands, and non-resource lands. I even initiated a petition for rulemaking. And on one occasion, I delivered a cake to the Commission on one of the anniversaries of the Supreme Court decision, possibly the 10th, in order to prompt them to take action. You know, maybe cake would do the trick. But instead of doing that, your predecessors adopted a rule describing how to justify allowing urban development in exception areas without simultaneously specifying any policy for all the rest of the exception areas. A rule implementing the sparse settlement requirement would be technically simple and avoid wasting everyone's time on case-by-case litigation in the future. Without clear rules, the 1,000 plus square miles of rural residential lands, that's correct, 1,000 square miles of rural residential lands, may steadily transition into exactly the kind of sprawl that Senate Bill 100 was adopted to prevent. Thanks to the work of former Planning Director Nordstrom and County Counsel Herbage, Curry County has avoided that outcome. And so can the rest of our magnificent state with your help. Thank you for your public service.
Thank you. Thank you for your public comment. I think we're going to move on. We have now agenda item number 9, Oregon Transportation Plan Update with Amanda Peets, Oregon Department of Transportation Business Operation Administrator. Amanda is joining us online. And I understand DLCD staff, Bill Holstrom, is available online for any questions as it relates to the DLCD program. We're going to welcome Amanda.
Great. Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
I'm starting to hear you. Maybe talk again.
Okay, great. Hopefully this is a good volume for you.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, I will share my screen and talk about the Oregon Transportation Plan. So my name is Amanda Peets. I'm the Administrator for Policy, Data, and Analysis with the Oregon Department of Transportation. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. So I wanted to share a little bit about Oregon's transportation plan. And that was recently adopted by our Transportation Commission in July of 2023. In this plan, you'll see some strong linkages to land use. Many of the objectives will touch on things that you're all working on to achieve, as well as highlight the shared nature of our work. It's really only through the commitment, cooperation, partnerships across many entities that we can realize the vision of this plan, and I'll walk through its pieces here now. Before getting too far, I want to ground us all in what the Oregon Transportation Plan is. Although it's created by the Oregon Department of Transportation and adopted by our commission, the Oregon Transportation Commission, it's a plan really covering all aspects of transportation statewide. So that means other state agencies, local governments, transit agencies, and more. It identifies policies for the movement of people. So think about driving, riding, whether in a transit bus, carpool, so on, walking, rolling, and also the movement of goods by truck, by rail, by air, and by water. It's our definitive long-range vision and policy framework. It goes out to the year 2050. Policies cover our planning efforts, project identification and selection, construction, maintenance, and operations. So really our cradle to grave of transportation efforts. It directs the work of the Oregon Department of Transportation. And thanks to your transportation planning rule, locals must be consistent with the direction of the Oregon Transportation Plan. So that's kind of a nice connection between our agencies in terms of linkages. I won't spend too much time on how we developed the plan, other than to say that we had hundreds of people that really helped to shape its content. It included participation from some of our modal committees, topic experts, advocacy organizations, state and local jurisdiction representatives, and community members. From the Land Conservation Development Commission, former Chair MacArthur helped to guide the early work in the plan. And then we were thankful to have Commissioner Warren appointed, who provided some really great feedback throughout the plan development process. We made concerted effort to really hear from the voices of the people directly. We compensated people for their time when cost to participate was a barrier. We captured video stories from across the state so that we could really hear directly firsthand what transportation means to them and what their needs are. We also helped to shape investment strategies by relating how changes and priorities can impact real households and real people. And so in the end, we really developed a plan focused more on the outcomes of the transportation system as opposed to the infrastructure itself. So in past plans you might be familiar with, we talk about like a bridge. Well, that's a product. Really, the bridge is about connecting communities. So the focus of this plan is much more on the outcomes of things and kind of changing the way that we frame that work. Our vision, therefore, solidifies the role of transportation, connecting people and goods to places. It supports all Oregonians, so it means people of different ages, abilities, incomes, races, and backgrounds. And it narrows in on the three lenses of climate, equity, and safety, and really applying those to all decisions that we make. The 6 goal areas that you see here on the left really help to provide a framework for outcomes that we need to achieve, and that policies fall under those that help us to get there and help us to understand how we might resolve potential conflicts that might arise between goals. You may be saying, okay, sure, Amanda, nice words, but it's just a plan. I mean, some of my commissioners even say that sometimes. But we really try to frame it in a way that's actionable. So I personally, from a commitment standpoint, but we collectively really need to make it more than a plan or a lofty vision. We need hard commitments for following through. So partly, we push this through policy to have those hard commitments. The policy that's here on this slide requires us to understand the impact of our decisions on climate, safety, and equity outcomes. It also holds us accountable to specific targets for those things. So for safety, we're targeting 0 deaths by 2050. For climate, we set a target of 20% reduction of passenger vehicle miles traveled by 2050 and a 77% reduction in emissions from fuels. For equity, we have commitments to specific work efforts. Targets and measures in this area are less developed, but we set ourselves a goal of setting those targets by next year. At ODOT, we're hard at work in really putting this policy into action. So as an example, we're setting processes and measurements in our 2027 through 2030 STIP. That's our statewide transportation improvement program. So basically, those are all our federal funds, the transportation projects. And within that process, for that next cycle that we're identifying projects, we're putting in an evaluation process to identify specific types of investments and locations that have the potential to increase or decrease emissions. So we want more projects that decrease emissions, less projects that increase emissions. We're also looking on the equity lens of providing benefits within high disparity communities, like geographic areas that concentrate lower or higher age levels, making sure we're addressing all abilities, income levels, race, and even looking at DBE contracting, for example. So those are some of the ways we're trying to take this, put it into real and meaningful action. For the work that you all do, the climate-friendly, equitable communities, I think you know well that there's no one solution to our climate crisis. It really is a multifaceted approach. So the transportation plan calls for reducing vehicle miles traveled per capita, which means activities like pricing the transportation system, demand management programs, so think about park and ride, van pool, some of those types of activities, parking pricing, which I know your commission has grappled with, and increasing multimodal options as part of that. The one example of work that we have underway is a partnership and commitment between our two agencies to support updates to transportation system plans consistent with the transportation planning rules that you recently updated. So ODOT, for example, is providing over $15 million in technical and financial support to locals to help implement that TPR. The other big mover beyond reducing vehicle miles traveled per capita, and by the way, there's very few plans in the nation that transportation agencies commit to this, so we're pretty proud to have that in there. The other key action is that for people that cannot shift to an alternate mode, that must drive or choose to drive, we want to make sure every single mile driven is clean. So our lean is on transportation electrification. Transportation electrification is very purposeful because it's not just EVs, it's not just cars and trucks, it's micromobility, so electric bikes and electric scooters. It's also transit buses and freight trucks. So it's a little bit of kind of all those components rolled in. Under my portfolio, our team is allocating $100 million in the next several years to build out public charging infrastructure. So we also just recently got a grant from the federal government in addition to that to fix broken chargers. One of our programs, which we call our community charging rebate, has already built 24 ports in Oregon that really directly expand charging availability in multi-unit dwellings and low-income areas. So it's a program we're pretty proud of, pretty excited to see, us trying to go through and implement these things. Now, towards the bottom of the slide, I want to say, last and importantly, while the headline here on the slide reads reduce greenhouse gas emissions, I don't want to undersell the climate adaptation component, which is covered well in the plan. I know that's something you all deal with as well in the adaptation framework kind of statewide. We are really across the state seeing devastating impacts of climate and extreme weather, from ice very currently here to wind, wildfires, flooding, and it's affecting people's lives, community and economic vitality, ability of emergency services to get in and out, ability of people to get to critical destinations. And we're seeing this pretty acutely on the transportation system. At ODOT, every 5 years, we're spending about $15 million more, and this isn't including the emergency response funds. This is base level budget on these more frequent and extreme events. So they are real. We're seeing pretty dramatic impacts of those. We really need multi-agency planning and efforts around evacuation, detours, and more on increasing kind of critical connections in some of those pieces. For safety, apologies, I didn't realize these were still animated. We have kind of expand upon issues like adaptation and resilience, which in and of itself is really a safety issue. Most transportation system decisions, one way or another, impact safety. So we've embedded safety for years into kind of our agency and the work that we do and targeted investments. Unfortunately, we're seeing a growing safety problem. We're at a 33-year high in fatalities in Oregon. We had 603 last year. Unfortunately, it's a trend that we're seeing nationally too. We're seeing a lot of crashes at intersections, roadway departures, where speed's a factor, distraction's a factor, impairment, and other issues. People who walk and bike are especially at risk. They're the most vulnerable. They don't have protection like a car does from one another. And our research that we've done in our ODOT research group has shown a higher propensity to be killed or seriously injured for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. So our plan in the OCP calls for efforts to address this disparity that we're recognizing. Overall, the policies for safety in the transportation plan emphasize what's called a safe systems approach. This is kind of a federally recognized approach. It focuses on safe people, safe roads, safe vehicles, and safe speeds. Equity is really multidimensional, and that's what I'm trying to reflect here on this side. So it focuses on what I call process, so community engagement, and outcomes. So low-cost transportation options, focusing on high disparity areas and completing some critical connections. As we operationalize our transportation plan policies for ODOT, we're doing that currently as part of what we call our strategic action plan. That's our 5-year action plan. We're framing our equity work in that as how we look, how we listen, and how we act. So it's both kind of an internal and an external element. So as we look, our workforce, we must mirror the population we serve. We put people in positions of power and decision-making roles that are from historically marginalized communities. We engage our staff and ensure that they feel a sense of belonging. We're listening. We're seeking feedback from communities. We use the feedback, most importantly, to make different decisions. We also work on building community capacity. And how we act. Make investments that benefit high disparity areas, contract with disadvantaged businesses and enterprises, support contracting approaches that further benefit historically marginalized communities. For funding, I wanted to touch upon just more than the 3 lenses that I've been talking about of climate safety and equity. Funding is such a fundamental issue that we're grappling with right now. When I say we, it's not just ODOT. It's cities, it's counties, it's tribes, it's transit agencies, and others. We're all woefully underfunded when it comes to transportation. Costs are exceeding the money coming in. So inflation's a big culprit. And if you look at the construction cost index, it's even higher than general inflation. We have staff costs and overheads that are increasing. And our revenue over time is starting to decline, given our dependence right now on the gas tax as the funding source. So this all leads to a state of disinvestment. The money ODOT has, and this is a really fine point I want to put on it, we will only be paving interstates in 2027 beyond, nowhere else. We don't have the money to pave any of our other highways past that point with the current funding that we have. So our legacy of investments are at risk, not only our roads, but our sidewalks, our rail lines, and more. The policies in the OTP really call for securing that sustainable and reliable funding, which means a paradigm shift for funding. So not just a one-time solution. So those are helpful, don't get me wrong. It's great that 19 million is coming to the department. It's the governor's office, the legislature has really led to make sure that we're, keeping the traveling public safe. So that's essential. But unfortunately, we'll still have the problem, the need arise again and again until we fix the mechanics of the problem itself. And what the mechanics I'm talking about is diversifying our funding portfolio. So we have the gas tax, adding a vehicle miles travel fee, like the Origo program, having the DMV fees, licenses, registrations, tolls, even carbon fees. We need a diversified portfolio to really support the needs that we have. We also need to index our fees to be able to adjust with inflation. So when we've received funding in the past, it's kind of a certain cent increase on the gas tax, for example. Well, that does not adjust with inflation. We need indexing. Without these changes, we're forced into making a decision between bad and worse. Unfortunately, our commission recently faced this when we were allocating our federal funds, the STIP that I was talking about earlier. When doing that, the commission had to cut back some really needed programs like senior and disabled transit to just bare bones level, and our funding and maintenance cut back 30% for maintenance and operation that we've had historically. And while we make the lesser of evil choices, we're still working to make the most of what we do have. So I'm singing the sad song of we don't have funding and the real impact that's going to have. At the same time, we should be very careful and thoughtful with the funding we do have, creating efficiencies, leveraging, and furthering the outcomes that we're talking about. That's climate, safety, and equity. Those have to be at the forefront of how we make those decisions. This is another policy. I didn't reference the policy number, but it's direction to really ensure that what I'm talking about plays out. The policy language gets at the most critical needs for investment. So this is a tiered prioritization, not an absolute hierarchy. So absolute hierarchy would be you can only spend in tier 1 until you've exhausted that, then you can spend in tier 2. This means you can spend across tiers, but the majority of money needs to be allocated in the top tiers. You can see this play out for something like safety, where in tier 1, we're really focused on preventing death, tier 2 on reducing crash risk, and tier 3 on improving comfort and sense of safety. So with limited funds, this prioritization becomes all the more important to make sure we're focusing on the most urgent, dire needs of our transportation system that further the goals in the transportation plan. These other pieces that are shown here on the slide really were mentioned throughout the presentation, but deserve attention in their own right. We must support the movement of goods to help keep Oregon's economy flowing. And mobility means that we maintain the connections of today, recognizing that some modes like biking and walking are incomplete systems. They require focus on filling critical gaps, like shown in the funding prioritization slide that I was just showing a moment ago. So before concluding, if Commissioner Warren is around, I defer to see if he has any comments or thoughts to offer as a participant in this process. And then I'll just wrap up a few comments and take some questions.
Commissioner Warren.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I am around. This process was really interesting for me, and it really resembled a massive shift in the way that ODOT's thinking about transportation, and it really did represent, I guess, my perspective of how they are taking the impacts that our transportation system has on our climate seriously. Because when you hear Amanda talk about reducing, vehicle miles travel per capita, and you hear talking about, the budgetary issues they're facing, and we have to recognize that a lot of their funding comes from the gas tax, right? And when we have a department who's saying, okay, we're going to reduce vehicle miles travel while also recognizing that they're going to be reducing their own department funding, that's a significant step for that department to take. And so I just want to recognize, their commitment to what Amanda's talking about today in this plan through that lens. They don't take it lightly by any means. And so I just want to continue our support as partners through this process to help make that transition as effortless as possible. And I think that linkage, between their work and our work really is land use. How do we really take a lot of the load off of Oregon Department of Transportation having to maintain roads by getting people off of them? We've built a transportation system that is so built out at this point in time that we just feasibly cannot continue to maintain it. And so the less we can use that or, rely on those connections that aren't necessary anymore, the better for this department. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I'd be happy to take any questions, Chair.
Before that, when you said less, I was thinking more, and then you had a different twist on the same thing with the less on the ones not used, and I was thinking use more of the ones that are there. I don't know if that's, thinking about the urban growth boundary, and we were talking about upgrades to infrastructure existing, obviously being easier than creating brand new ones in terms of cost. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts, because it was interesting, your conclusion. It's kind of split from what I was thinking.
Well, I mean, directly thinking about land use and how a lot of our system has been built out across, a citywide system. A lot of those uses, as you get away from that central core, are much less dense, right? So you have fewer users actually engaging in those spaces or those facilities. So I think that's my main point, is that we can concentrate our usage into these more required areas, more dense areas, like we've been trying to accomplish, I think, in our land use system since 1971, and really just keep that process and vision going. I think that will help ODOT achieve their goals as well.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions? Thoughts? Commissioner Lazo?
Thank you, Chair. I guess mine's not really a question, and it doesn't relate so much to our specific relationship with ODOT in the land use framing, but I think since you brought this to us this afternoon, I'm a little remiss in not bringing it up, and I'm really interested in hearing more about how you all elevated equity as one of your three main focus areas. And then there are a couple comments I can make after that. Did you all work with consultants on that aspect of your plan?
Yeah, Commissioner, we really worked with our advisory committee in setting the goals of the Oregon Transportation Plan. So we had the 6 that I shared earlier in the slide, and then we worked with the committee to refine those to what are the 3 most important ones that we want to add that lens to kind of everything that we do. So it was really through committee guidance, through public feedback that we wound up adding that in. With consultant support, we did do a white paper that was fairly extensive on the dimensions of equity. And part of that is understanding the role that transportation has played in creating disparities itself. So you look at some of our interstate system, how that's divided some communities, how that's led to kind of siphoning off some lower income areas and some other impacts there. So I think the first part is recognizing, we have contributed to the problem. The second part is what are the decisions that we make in inflection points that can support more equitable outcomes. So with consultant support and looking at what other states do, in addition to talking to a number of experts, just trying to identify what opportunities we really have to make a difference in that. In addition to that, third component, which I mentioned, is really centering the voices in our decision-making processes in meaningful ways. Like we've gone out, Oregon does a good job in general of doing outreach. That said, I don't know that Oregon does a good job in general of doing outreach and using the feedback. So I think that's the difference that we're trying to emphasize as part of this.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Shoot, I've forgotten one thing I was going to say there, but I guess what I would say, I think about an agency holding up equity as one of their centering principles, but then in identifying the objectives around equity is actually not having identifiable goals until 2025. And I think one of the things I bring up sometimes around using the framework of a lens is a good example here where you talk about equity, but I think you also said in your presentation that for instance, that there is a disparity for communities, Black communities in safety, right? And that's a clear equity goal that could be identified right now and wouldn't have to come off to 2025. And if you already identified it as one of your safety goals, again, to me, it identifies why we wouldn't necessarily have equity as a separate goal. There aren't separate pieces that we actually need to identify that as you are identifying those disparities in your systems, those can be your equity goals. I think the other place I'd frame that is if you're not looking at, the STIP investment plan for 27, and, at beginning in 27, if you don't do equity goals until throughout 25, you're going to be making investment choices without those goals in place. And so that's, I appreciate that you all have put that in place, and I'm looking forward to how it will play out fully in the plan. I think it might be a little difficult and disingenuous to kind of talk about it the way you are right now in the plan. I remember what I was going to say going back, that the other thing to recognize in that holistic framework of how certain disparities have come about is, for instance, safety issues aren't necessarily created solely by transportation investments. They're actually created potentially by housing investments and where folks are allowed to live. So it's not necessarily the transportation system that created the disparity, but other factors and other partners can that are making decisions that are impacting the work that you are doing. And so part of that partnership that we might have with you in how communities are affected. So appreciate the partnership and the work that Commissioner Warren did, but wanted to bring those forward.
I think those are excellent points, Commissioner. Appreciate those. One thing I might say is, in particular, your first set of points, the Oregon Transportation Plan is holistic for the state of Oregon. So I think that's where we struggled in creating statewide metrics for equity, because that translates in different ways to different organizations. And that's why it's taken us a little bit longer there. That said, we are moving forward in our organization, ODOT, with commitments to what that looks like. And to your point, embedding it in different pieces. We have a standout section of our strategic action plan. I'm going to put a link here in the chat so the staff can share that with you all. We have a standout section for equity where it's our workforce components, our contracting components, some of those that are very concerted, larger efforts. And then we have sections for safety, for example, where, to your very point, we are recognizing that research. We are making commitments within our investment programs to prioritize those communities and closing the gaps for our vulnerable road users. So we're starting to operationalize that, but appreciate the pressure. That's what we need to do. We need to have accountability to following this through.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I downloaded the whole plan, but I didn't get to look at all 156 pages. So.
Commissioners, Commissioner Boyer?
So thank you very much for this update. And thank you, Commissioner Warren, for sitting through it. You had mentioned rails. You kind of listed some things that were going to go to the wayside. And rails, you had mentioned rails. So is that railroad crossings, I'm assuming?
Yeah, there's a couple different dimensions to rail. So primarily crossings, which we have some safety issues at and some needs. So we're not having the funding to be able to address some of those critical locations. I'll say we're also underfunded on the multimodal transportation side. We have a program called Connect Oregon that funds non-highway freight movement. And that's unfortunately being fairly underfunded as well. We're running a competitive program currently. It runs about every 2 years. Right now we're about 50 million. Early versions of that program were around 100 million. So we're seeing a much, much higher demand than we have available funds for. So it just means we're not making, the rail system may not degrade as much, but we're not making progress on some of those key transfer points and opportunities to make that system more efficient to be a viable option.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other comments? I guess I was just going to add on the equity piece, because I was looking under equity about the contracting with BIPOC, tribal, and women-owned businesses, and that study that recently came out about the state as a whole and various departments really failing when it came to contracting dollars. And so I was thinking that's a pretty easy goal. And then on the workforce part too, to set, it kind of alluded to it, but that I guess I quickly saw that those were too easy. One could set those goals today. And so just an encouragement on that part with regard to those. And I'm sure you have other documentation, but what I appreciate also is state departments moving toward transparency, easily accessible transparency. So we're here, and it might be in here, this is just the summary. We're here and we want to get there, so that folks can hold people accountable. So you might already have
Yeah,
that, but
I
I
think
just
those-
thought I would mention it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think those are great suggestions. I added in the chat, which looks like it goes to hosts and panelists, so you may not be able to see it now, but we have a draft that I just shared yesterday with our commission of our strategic action plan. So that's our 5-year commitment. It has more metrics, like some of the ones that you're mentioning in that document that shows how we're operationalizing the transportation plan and other important directions. So I added the link to that. So if this commission or body has interest in seeing that, wants to engage in that more, or has any comments, we're likely moving forward to finalizing that in March. That said, it's a living document and one will adjust over time. So certainly happy to look for opportunities to partner between our agencies on some of those efforts.
Thank you. Sure. Deputy Director Green.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. I'm over here in the corner. But thank you for making time today. And I just wanted to recognize for the commission, I just wanted to recognize some things Amanda would probably never say about herself and our partnership, but it's been for a while now. It is long and strong. And now standing commission's questions about equity too, I just want to point out a few tangible things that ODOT provided to us when we were in a really hard spot and trying to lift up our own equity work. In COVID, when we had a 34% budget cut, and we're trying to initiate the climate friendly and equitable communities rule at the same time, ODOT provided funding. Director Strickler and Amanda provided funding to fund our first our rules advisory committee members who needed financial support, otherwise would not have been able to serve. So those rulemaking advisory committee members, as you might recall, helped develop the equitable outcome statement was about 7 pages long, and then through which was a lens for all the rules to be run through. So just little things go a long way. I think that was like, budget dust, but it was huge for us. And Amanda, thank you, just really got us going. And then currently, as Amanda mentioned, we're looking for funding together. Our two agencies are working closely together, Director Strickland and Director Bateman, Amanda and our teams, to find the funds necessary to extend that $15 million that Amanda mentioned that they had from federal funds that we're able to allocate towards transportation system plans. Because our rules have shortened the timeline, it's challenging to kind of figure out that pathway forward. So we're working together on that. And one of the ways we're doing that is looking at how our rules compare with Title VI requirements under the Federal Civil Rights Act. So just continuing that kind of under the hood, working together. And then Amanda too, I'll forward to you if it's useful, the commission's equity framework for decision making that they passed earlier this year and directed our agency to work on, use on all projects. So thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners for the opportunity to share.
Great to hear that the work done together.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I just may add real quickly, I think what Kirsten's illustrating is just the history that our two agencies have in really partnering and working together to really advance the goals and help Oregon to thrive. So I want to extend a thank you to DLCD for the invite here today, and particularly to Director Bateman and Assistant Director Green for partnership and collaboration overall.
Thank you. So I think that concludes, yep, good. That concludes our last agenda item for today. I want to thank again, thanks to the Mill Casino and the Cookwell Indian Tribe for their hospitality. We will recess the meeting now, which is 3:11 until 8 a.m. tomorrow, when we will begin with agenda item number 10, which is a regional tour of the Coos Bay Estuary and roundtable lunch. Members of the public are welcome to join us in the room for the roundtable. It will not be live streamed. Thank you for joining us today, and see you tomorrow.